So I'm going to kick us off. I'm going to hand it off to Shadi to introduce you all to the task force this morning. And then Ryan Lau is going to introduce Councilmember Bauters. So just a couple opening remarks before we get started. But just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Mark Orcutt. I'm the President and CEO of the East Bay Leadership Council. If you're new to the East Bay Leadership Council, I don't think many of you are, but I'll give you the pitch anyway. We are a nonprofit, employer-led organization on a mission to strengthen the economy and improve quality of life in Contra Costa and Alameda County. It's a big task. We can take on a lot of policy issues in that area: housing, transportation, education, workforce development, water, air quality, education. The list can go on and on. We have many members that touch just about every corner of the East Bay economy. And our advocacy can take many forms, whether that be at a city council meeting, at the board of supervisors, in the state capitol, at regional boards like the Air Board or MTC. So we're a lot of places at once. We're a small team of 4, but we love what we do, and we're proud to make a difference. So that's kind of who the East Bay Leadership Council is. Our work kind of falls into 3 buckets. It's that public policy advocacy. It's events that we hope connect, inspire, and inform. Today is one of those mornings that I hope we all leave smarter for kind of what's happening in the transportation world for the East Bay, as well as many of the other things that Councilmember Bauters is working on and brings expertise to. And finally, we run some programs. So we run a candidate training program called Build the Bench to help people learn how to run and win elected office, and a nonprofit board match program that helps community leaders get matched to nonprofits looking for new board members. So that's a little snapshot of us. Thank you for being here this morning. And now I will hand it off to Shadi to welcome you to our task force. Shadi,
thanks. Thanks, Mark. Welcome everybody to this morning's meeting, and thanks you, Councilmember Bauters, for joining us this morning. The Housing and Transportation Task Forces falls under the infrastructure umbrella at EBLC, which I'm privileged to be leading. We focus a lot on advocacy work and collaboration with elected officials and transportation agencies in the East Bay, both Alameda and Contra Costa County. And our work focus around promoting and advocating for projects and programs and plans that are related to improve the quality of life and the mobility throughout the region, and equity as well for everybody. It's a big task as well. We'll try to make it as encompassing as possible. And through events like today's events, we'd like to bring the voices of our members to elected officials and to the broader public around the issues that are important to the East Bay residents. We appreciate Councilmember Bauters for taking the time of his busy schedule to be with us today. Look forward to what he's going to have to say and hear what he has to say, and for future collaboration as well. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to, and one more thing. If you're not a member of EBLC and you'd like to join us, please reach out to me or to Mark or Meg or some of the STEM team members. Would love to have you. Would love to engage with you and hear what you have to say and contribute. Our membership is open for people to join on our calls. It's not a huge commitment as well on the Transportation Task Force. We meet monthly to strategize around transportation-related topics, and the Housing Task Force does the same. So if you have interest in either one of these topics, just reach out, please, and I'd love to have you. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ryan.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ryan Lau. I'm the chair of the East Bay Leadership Council Transportation Task Force, and my day job is an external affairs representative at AC Transit, as you can see. Here to introduce Councilmember Bauters. So I'll just read a brief bio and just maybe let you know how I know him. John J. Bauters is a council member and former mayor of Emeryville. In addition to serving on the Emeryville City Council since 2016, he served as the chair of the Alameda County Transportation Commission and was the chair of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District from 2022 to 2023. He's been a leader on sustainable land use, affordable housing development, environmental justice, urban conservationism, and economic policies that support equitable, people-oriented communities. In these roles, he's championed Emeryville's $50 million affordable housing bond, which is being used to add hundreds of affordable housing infill development for low-income low-income families, seniors, transition-aged youth, and people experiencing homelessness. He's regarded as a statewide expert on transportation policy and a member of the National League of Cities Federal Advocacy Committee, and has helped secure millions of dollars in grant funding for transportation and goods movement projects in Alameda County. He's partnered with development and business stakeholders to diversify Emeryville's local economy, making it one of the most desirable East Bay communities for business. He's earned a Bachelor's of Arts in Government and International Studies from the University of Notre Dame and law degree from Boston College Law School. In his full-time job, he's a victims advocate and policy director, writing and lobbying legislation on behalf of crime survivors. So I've had the pleasure of knowing Councilmember Bauters for about a decade. He's always been very clear-headed about his vision for the region and how to get there. And we always appreciate his leadership. He's a big transit advocate, which I obviously appreciate. And I will, and I should just mention that he is a current candidate for Alameda County Supervisor. And I will turn it over to Councilmember Bauters to sort of expand on that.
Thanks, Ryan. Good morning, everyone. Have to give a couple quick shout outs to Ronnie Hattrip and Courtney over at Scientific Adventure for Girls, some folks I know from Emeryville. Just really grateful to have the opportunity to be here today. So thank you to EBLC for having me. And Ryan said a lot of it. So let me just briefly add a couple pieces to my background. So in my full-time job, I'm not a full-time elected. I work for the Alliance for Safety and Justice, a 501c3. I work for the C4 arm of that. I do advocacy on behalf of victims of violent crime and survivors of sex trafficking and domestic violence. So I write legislation that will empower people who have been victims to move back towards self-sufficiency and safety in their communities. Do a lot of partnership with elected officials here in California and Arizona. I'm actually joining you from Phoenix. I had a hearing all afternoon yesterday on occupational license, removing barriers to occupational licenses for people who want to go back to work so that we can further advance the jobs economy. With over 200,000 jobs empty in Arizona, there's a lot of work here to do. Been doing that work in California for over a decade, as Ryan mentioned, and really just spend a lot of time in the human services and health sector in my full-time job. I've been a council member for 8 years, kind of known as the guy who will put housing in his own backyard, and very happy to be pro-development in the way that we need to be. We need the Bay Area to really create a space that's inviting for jobs and workers. We need to make it possible for people to commute very short distances to their place of employment, and we need to prevent the urban growth line from expanding further into the Central Valley as much as possible. That's really important to the economic success of our region. Coupled with that, obviously needs to be some environmental and transportation enhancements and infrastructure builds. And so I have been on the Transportation Commission for 8 years. I'm in my 3rd year as chair of the Transportation Commission. And as Ryan mentioned, I'm kind of known for my interest to go and bring money back, leverage the good work we do, Measure BB and our local sales tax. How do we leverage that to bring down state funding? And more importantly, since the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed, how do we bring federal money back to Alameda County to invest in goods movement, safe infrastructure? Done a bunch of work around Chrissy to bring rail safety improvements to the county, which is a big thing. Happy to answer questions about the Transportation Commission and the future of transit today. Similarly, I've been the chair of the Air District, and in that role, really have worked hard to both improve the efficacy of government and the responsiveness of a large bureaucracy to stakeholders. I know that a lot of businesses feel that the permitting process through the engineering division at the Air District has been slow and tedious. And one of the things that we really have spent the last 2 years doing is kind of overhauling the way the agency operates. We have new people in executive leadership. We adopted an all new admin code and new policies around how we'll operate. and we're engaged with the community in a way that we've never been before. All of those are positive factors in moving forward. Emissions regulations to meet the state mandated emissions reductions that were put in front of us, as well as the ones given to us by CARB, but also to ensure that we do that hand in hand with business and labor to improve economic opportunity as we make that kind of a transition. Other than that, I would just say that I'm somebody who loves the outdoors. You may, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see me say go outside quite a bit. I really delight to be in nature and the natural environment. And I spend a lot of my time volunteering with people who are hungry and homeless in Oakland and Emeryville, something that is personal to me as I was formerly unhoused myself as a youth. So I think I'm going to stop there with the kind of who I am and turn it back over to Mark to facilitate, a Q&A. I'd love to hear what you have to ask.
Thanks, John. And thank you for joining us today. I'll just kind of reiterate for the group. I'm hoping that you stay on mute. If you come off mute, Meg will mute you again. We just want to make sure that we avoid background noise today. Other than the background noise that's happening outside my window, we're digging up the streets in Walnut Creek to put in some new central sand pipeline. So that's also happening. But if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that and guiding us on this conversation with Councilmember Bauters. So you mind if I call you John, just so I don't have to keep saying Councilmember Bauters over there?
Yeah, John.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to call you John this morning. I promise if I see you out in public, I'll still call you Councilmember.
Call me John all the time.
But I just wanted to kick us off with what should folks in the greater East Bay know about Emeryville? What are you most proud of in your town?
Well, and most proud of, I would say the thing I'm most proud of is that we're not some of our neighbors, and that we're a functional government, and that we're a place that's really receptive to folks who want to innovate. So Emeryville, for anyone who's been in the Bay Area for more than about 15 years, will probably recall Emeryville was a dump, essentially. It's a large toxic wasteland. It had a lot of environmental pollutants. It was very heavy on industrial. And I grew up in an industrial town in the Midwest. I'm from a family of auto workers and truckers, and I can tell you that there's a real important need to focus on how we keep manufacturing and how we keep people in blue collar jobs part of our economic sector. But we also need to innovate and realize that the future, is going to be different in many ways. So what I'm really proud about in Emeryville is that with 1 square mile of footprint to work with, we've really created a diverse local economy. We were kind of heavy on retail and shopping for a long time, and we've really got a burgeoning life sciences center. We have a lot of innovators in food technology, food safety, medicine, and pharmaceuticals, and we're really starting to see a lot of new creative folks come in. We did keep a portion of the city zoned industrial, which I felt was really important when we did our zoning overhaul, and that was intended to ensure that people who are on the front lines of manufacturing technology can come. I was in a particular building, I can't say too much, the other day, with a very large prospective tenant company that wants to move a really large aspect of its manufacturing and kind of service work to this part of the East Bay, and very much welcome them, talk to them about how their focus on green energy and clean fuel solutions was really a good match for a city like ours. So we're also looking to be leaders on sustainability, and we're about 10 years ahead on our climate action plan goals, which just puts us in a position to kind of further attract businesses that want to be on the cutting and leading edge of how to be responsible, sustainable civic partners, which is what more consumers today are looking for now than ever.
Yeah, thank you for that. So also your city council has been known or called, I think it was the New York Times that called you one of the most YIMBY city councils in California. I don't know if you go a step further than just in California with that. But what is that? What does that mean? Why do you think you earned that title, and what lessons do you think there are for other city councils, other city leaders, and housing advocates in the East Bay?
Yeah, I mean, there's this kind of fake binary conversation in the housing space that I think is toxic to what's really needed. So there's folks who say, well, we only want 100% affordable housing. We can't have anything else. But then you have to put it over here and it can only be 3 stories. They don't really understand the financing of housing is what I experience. And then you have other folks who are market driven, who are accused of at least not really taking into consideration concerns about displacement and gentrification. Listen, like on my career, my personal trajectory, so I was unhoused as a young person. My first house was a boarding house. I lived with 17 other people in Altadena, California in the same house. I had 1 shelf and one of the 4 refrigerators in the kitchen. I had $12,800 of income that year. I understand being poor. I understand being unhoused. I understand needing to find and access housing that's affordable, right? I spent 20 years working in nonprofit advocacy. The first half of that, I was a homeless outreach worker. I was an attorney for people who were unhoused. I had gotten an AmeriCorps scholarship to go to law school. So I spent a lot of my time working with people who were economically at the brink of being unhoused or who had already fallen into homelessness. And the reality is that one of the biggest things we need to do is you need to produce housing. Housing has to be abundant, it has to be affordable, and it has to be accessible to people. So on one hand, it's like this as a part of the economic sector, this is a jobs creator, this is a jobs multiplier in a number of ways. It brings people into the community. It also has a positive impact on the way other businesses around housing work. And I think people in the business community understand that, but I don't think residents understand that. They hope they can keep their community sometimes encased in amber and think it won't change. That's a very bucolic idea of how communities grow, and it's just not reflective of a good, stable regional economy. But on the same side, there has to be some protections in place so that it's not like, well, development just automatically means certain people get to stay and other people go. So one of the most important things we did was that we passed a $50 million affordable housing bond. I had support of the business and development community to do that. And with it, we put in place an expenditure plan for how we were going to deploy those funds so that the city was actually an economic market player. So we were developing our own housing alongside of the private sector, where we had certain agreements with the private sector that a percentage of what they built was going to go along with our plan. But we otherwise removed barriers, we streamlined housing, we made housing production easier, we upzoned the entire city, everything in Emeryville, there's no single family anymore, everything can be developable. And I got a lot of criticism for that, but at the same time, Emeryville is the only city that in each of the last 2 censuses has increased its Black population. That's not by mistake, that's by design. So we have a set of policies around that. We've built affordable housing as we went. We ensured that we were placekeeping for people who already lived in our community. And then we had certain social policies that supported that. So we are one of only 3 cities in California with a city-funded childcare center. And I ran a ballot measure to create a special quarter-cent sales tax that permanently funds that. So it's not part of the city's budget, but it makes childcare accessible to lower income and working families. And so now we have people who work at the shopping center who walk and bike to work. They take AC Transit across town. They do the things that they need to do every day without having a social and an economic burden on them. And so it's a combination of policies that are needed. And yes, we are not just the most YIMBY city in California. We are probably one of the most in the country. And I get asked to speak regularly about the topic all over the country because it can be done, but it does take political leadership to make it happen.
Yeah. So the state picked up a lot of new responsibility in terms of enforcing new state housing laws that have been passed by the legislature. What's the path forward for balancing that accountability and rewarding folks who are adding that much needed housing for the region? Like, full transparency, East Bay Leadership Council has been in full support of so many of those efforts and do see it as not only an environmental but an economic imperative that we continue to build housing, not just where it's easy but where it's needed. And
right.
So we'll continue to show up for those fights. But what's the path forward for balancing that accountability and the local control that's so important to city council members? So how do you address that? And I promise transportation folks, I'm going to get to some transportation questions. I'm starting on housing.
Transportation requires housing, folks. So this is still part of your bandwidth. So this is a great question, Mark. And first of all, thanks to EBLC for supporting that legislation. I try to have us be the first city to sign on to most of it. I am not always the most liked by some of the other city councils because they're like, you're giving up local control. Local control also means responsibility, right? If you aren't going to use it in a way that's effective or is going to deliver, I think people are more worried about a large minority of their homeowners being upset that, this will be too close to here, or we don't have services to accommodate that, or people will now say it's not infrastructure ready, right? Like, I think people don't understand that if you build 6 more miles of suburban tract home out into the greenfields, the cost of maintaining those roads, adding the water, the sewer, the trash, that's actually far more costly and unsustainable than it would be to put and house people proximate to transit and their jobs in a brownfield infill. People just don't want to reconcile the math. And the truth is, when you talk to people about it, Mark, you can't talk to them in a Like when they're talking at you with feelings, something I always train other advocates is if you talk to them with facts, people just take it as condescension. So you have to talk to people feelings to feelings about how you feel about things. So I often don't use facts when I talk to people. I actually talk about how I feel about the situation because it requires them to grapple with someone else's emotive response, because that's all they're giving. It's very common when we talk about parking and bike lanes. I can get to that later. But so I think to your question though, you know, I personally think the state is being the responsible adult in the room. They're stepping in and saying, communities, you need to do these things. And what they're doing is they've put out not just some carrots, but carrots weren't enough. There weren't enough hungry rabbits in the cities. So now they have some sticks to move them along into the pen. And people are going to grumble and complain. But if you, like, I'm, you know, in Arizona right now for a hearing, and I was at a hearing yesterday where it was a bill to approve accessory dwelling units across the entire state to nullify every city ordinance that would prohibit it. It's completely bipartisan and people are like, this is pragmatic. And I'm like, where am I? This is crazy. But California, there's an opposition to that. And I think that local control is something that we need to recalibrate city expectations around as to like what you have control over, because you haven't been locally responsible. Like everyone just thinks someone else is going to build it. In Emeryville, we're a pro-housing city. We're proposing to build 150% of our regional housing need allocation. We already had one of the largest percentage increases in the region. And we said, we'll just go 150% of that. So we're getting money first. And because we have local housing money from our bond, we're leveraging it. And the state gave us $44 million in HCD accelerator funding to build 90 units of permanent supportive housing for the homeless. We funded that project in a year. Cities can do it if they really want to. And so we just continue to be part of the coalition of the willing. And then we get to worry about things like, oh, do we want to put a movie screen in the back courtyard of that project? Or do we want it to be a pickleball court? Like we spend time on those details because we're moving the housing into place.
Yeah, I think that you make a really important point. Obviously, there's an economic imperative. When employers come to the table and they're trying to decide where they're going to put their headquarters, where they're going to have their workforce, they take a look. And it's like, is the workforce here, and can we pay people what they would need to afford to live here? And if they can't, they choose to go somewhere else. And so if we want to continue to thrive in our economy and attract the kind of employers that so many people do, we need the housing to do it. So, but we also need a lot of other things to be a thriving region. And I want to pivot to kind of your role on the Alameda County Transportation Commission, ACTC. Are there any key corridor investments that you think deserve our particular attention? Any recently completed projects that you're particularly proud of or want to highlight related to ACTC?
Yeah, I mean, so I would break it into several different modes, right? So I would say first on rail, one of the biggest issues is that prior to COVID, the Port of Oakland was one of the fastest growing economic ports in the country. And it still has a projected increase for growth and for the movement of goods through the region. And because of its location, there's hundreds of rail crossings in Alameda County as stuff branches from the Port of Oakland all across the Western United States. One of the challenges we have is that there's a lot of conflicts between those crossings and local roads, and that creates safety issues, goods movement delays, things like that. So one of the biggest kind of mode or corridor enhancements that I've worked on is we went to we went to DC this past year. We had a CRISI grant application, which is the Capital Rail Improvement and Safety Infrastructure grant program, and the feds gave us $25 million. We're prioritizing 28 crossings in Alameda County for initial investments for improvements, where we're either going to do crossing eliminations or we're going to do double arm gates with fences and other things that will allow for safer goods movement on rail, which is going to be really critical because one of the other things is that rail is also sharing passenger movement. And as we think about future endeavors like Link 21 and the South Bay Connect and some of these other programs, BART doesn't use the same rail as the UPRR, but those types of rail crossings, we're going to have a need to increase passenger rail as we grow. And so there's a need to make these improvements now, not just for goods movement, but also for passenger safety, which is going to be critical. I think the other two areas where I look is in terms of the interstate system. There's a couple things we're doing right now that are safety improvements. So there has been a lot of complaints around the 580, 680 interchange, the way that was designed. And I would point to that as being one of the places where I'm trying to problem solve right now. So that interchange was in Measure BB as an expenditure item. And back in 2014, it was listed at that time as a $1.2 billion project to just do the whole thing over. That was kind of like the voters, and the commission just kind of were like, we'll just put the whole thing on the list. Well, there's two things that have changed. One, that project is now over $3 billion. And two, the federal government and the state are not prioritizing highway infrastructure projects with funding. So when we go to Sacramento and DC and we talk to them about these projects, they're like, yeah, that's great. We don't want to fund that. They're looking for things that are multimodal. They're looking to fund things that are safety improvements on streets and local roads. So if you follow the Safe Streets for All grant program, Reconnecting Communities grant program, all the federal monies that are being put out, they do not prioritize freeways. We've gone and asked for 2 freeway grants and we've been denied both of them. And the message was really clear because they gave us money for San Pablo Avenue corridor. They gave us money for East Bay Greenway. They've given us money for other things, but not for freeways. So we sat down, we're like, the price is going to keep going up. There's no way that we're going to ever fund this full interchange improvement. But what is the problem is my question. I was like, what do we need? What did we put it on the list for? And it turns out a couple things. One, there was a major safety problem at a couple of the interchange lanes themselves. The lanes just merged. There's no signage. There's no shoulder space. There's not enough runway length to have a truck make an interchange movement with a car. We've also had 6 people die at a particular off-ramp in the past 5 years. And so what we did is there was only $20 million of Measure BB money put towards that. We were supposed to go leverage that to find the rest, which we're realizing will never happen. So rather than lose a project that's got a safety need altogether, what we did is we sat down with Caltrans and we looked at their SHOP program and then their corridor safety funding that they get from the state. And we have an agreement with them that they will prioritize the changes that need to be made to that interchange. So what we're doing is proposing an amendment to Measure BB that will allow us as the commission to change that project into an immediate buildable project that we can deliver for voters that will provide safety enhancements. So that's just one of the corridor changes. I think there's other opportunities. We're looking at Whipple Industrial at 880 on the 880 corridor. That's one that's going to get improvements. We're trying to accelerate that by taking the prioritized money out of the HOV lane project on 880 and saying, let's instead build the interchange changes that we need so that goods movement is more seamless there and safe. So we are trying to consolidate some things to get projects online faster as costs increase. And then I would say the other thing is local streets and roads, right? So there's a need to ensure that transit can also go effectively. And AC Transit is obviously our region's preferred transit provider. We would like to see opportunities for bus rapid transit to be effective. There are some challenges with the way International East 14th was built. And I think AC Transit and the City of Oakland recognize that, and they're looking at ways to problem solve that. But as a North County representative on the San Pablo corridor, we're working towards building something that will be a neighborhood front door kind of street, a main street that's going to be more accessible to everybody, which we think will improve transit and also help the businesses along that corridor.
No, and thank you for bringing up 580-680. That's certainly been something on our list at the East Bay Leadership Council. So if there's anything we can do to help you in telling that story, because I certainly believe that not all freeway highway investments are created equal. And telling that story about why this is a critical safety improvement, I think can go a long way into us making the improvements that we need to make, even though the politics are changing. Right now, the politics are changed right now related to freeway and highway investments. So it's an opportunity for us to get better at storytelling and advocating and speaking to how it feels, maybe not the facts, kind of to your point earlier. But you also brought up another key corridor that I would love to kind of get your take on. Multimodal improvements continue to be a top priority for us and how we can better leverage that as a region. So one example that crosses county lines, actually, that you mentioned there was San Pablo Avenue. So what does your ideal San Pablo Avenue look like? What are the roadblocks? How can organizations like ours, potentially help us make that vision a reality?
Yeah, great question. So just on the 580-680, since we did pass the comment period out in January from the commission, back in April, when April comes up, there'll be a chance to fully vote on it. So I think it'd be great for EBLC to send a letter supporting that modification. It's supported by Pleasanton, Dublin, and Livermore. So to support that modification to the amendment of the transportation plan so that we can get that project underway as quickly as possible. That would be a great opportunity for you to lean in. On San Pablo Avenue, we tried to partner with Contra Costa County on that, and they decided to kind of slow walk their process a little bit. So we started out of the gate working with them to do that study at the same time. They wanted to spend a little more time on it. I know they are picking up some speed now and focusing on that. And my hope is that we will have one seamless corridor at some here is in Alameda County. So Albany, Berkeley, Emeryville, and Oakland have the San Pablo Avenue corridor. The vision for it is that it be a complete street. So multimodal being a complete street, one where there's equity in the modes that are available to people, because there's an increasing number of people, especially in North County, who are not driving. And that's for various reasons, economic reasons, lifestyle choices. People are not driving. And the reliability of transit is degraded currently on that corridor because of times and delays. So putting bus rapid transit there will be really effective to getting more people on the bus. People will see that bus going by. It's going to reduce headways significantly. We want to have the transit system be sustainable, and that means we need fare box returns, which means we need riders. You get riders by making streets more transit friendly. So there's a need to do that. Similarly, that's kind of one of the few corridors through that part of the county. If you look especially through the Oakland downtown, through North Oakland and Emeryville area, the roads aren't in a grid system. They're kind of in a triangular pattern, the way the roads are set up. So there is no way for pedestrians and bicyclists to want to walk or bike through that corridor to do it other than on San Pablo. So we need to make that a streamlined space for them as well. You got to balance that with some of the business needs, which means we've been doing a lot of work at how do we set up delivery and loading zones. In Emeryville, for example, we're taking all the side streets and cutting the first 40 feet of curb at the side streets to make those delivery zones for the businesses on every block that face San Pablo. So we're trying to make it as accessible as possible, including spaces for ADA in the corridor where there's currently opportunities to have the lanes of traffic move into center kind of median areas and have ADA spaces so that there's accessibility as well for paratransit and other things like that. And then we're going to do bus enhancements. So I would say that's my vision, and my hope for it is that it becomes truly multimodal, which in other parts of the world has been shown to be very economically beneficial.
Yeah, so I think you started to make the transition there, but I think anytime I think about multimodal, I do just think about general mobility. And you talked about paratransit. So what can we do to make our transportation more friendly to seniors and people with disabilities? Like, make it about mobility from that perspective. We certainly think about that a lot as an organization, and just want to give you a moment to talk about how you might envision that in Alameda County.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to make transit more accessible and friendly, it's got to be reliable, it has to be clean, and it has to be safe, and it has to be accessible. Those are the things you have to have an effective transportation system. So AC Transit is one of the cleanest operators I've ever been on. BART has done a lot of work to improve cleanliness, which we can get to what does BART still need to do, right? Safety is something that's going to be part of any transportation program. I think the big issue right now is reliability. The headways are too long for some of these bus routes. And the same thing with BART, the connection between these transit agencies, you can get off a BART train and the Caltrain just left 2 minutes before. It's not intuitive, and people don't want to wait 20 more minutes for the next train. So there are some reliability issues, and there's advocates working around that, and I support those principles to ensure that we have more reliable transit. But I also think local governments in the private sector could literally look outside the front door of their business. I don't think many of us are thinking very carefully about this. I'll just share one example of something I did that has literally gotten me on the stage as a keynote speaker in places that I couldn't imagine. So a couple years ago now, I guess it's 2 years ago now, March of 2 years ago, I was sitting at a bus stop on 40th Street, and a man across the street from me was leaning against a trash can with a cane. He had a bag of groceries, old man. And I just thought to myself, why doesn't he just sit down? And then I noticed there was no bus seat. And I got on my bus and I watched on the other side of 40th Street that every bus stop on the other side of the street had no bus seats. And I was like, that's really weird. And I chaired the transportation committee in the city, and I went to the meeting and I said, why don't we have bus seats everywhere? And they said about half the stops in the city don't have them. And there was various reasons why we hadn't done it and why they hadn't existed. And I was like, one of the reasons people don't ride transit is because, one, they wait 20 minutes for a bus. Two, they got to wait standing up. And if they're carrying things, have kids or elderly, they have a physical mobility issue, it's not really accessible to them. So within 3 months, we're not San Francisco. We don't need to study a toilet for a year and a half. Like we were like, yeah, I got to throw some shade sometimes. So like we literally, I was like, I want you to come back with like how we put a bus seat at every bus stop. And the staff were like, you for real? I'm like, I'm for real. Like this shouldn't be a low hanging fruit. So I gave them some options for like quick builds. They came back, they said, this one is actually really good. We think it's reliable. We didn't study it. We didn't go out and ask the public's input on the color of it. We didn't do a thing. We basically amended the paving contract. I was like, just amend the regular street paving contract. We added $150,000 for labor and costs and things. And we installed all these bus seats. And you'd have thought I was a genius or something. I was like being written up all over the place. Other cities are quoting me. I'm like, nothing I did was genius. I was like, as someone who rides a bus, it makes sense that people should be able to sit when they wait for a bus. But now I walk past these new bus seats everywhere and there's people in the seats all the time. And I think to myself, this is an easy way to get more people to find transit as like front door accessible. And if you've got a business that has a transit stop outside and it's just a pole right now, ask yourself, like, who can I call at the city and say, I'm willing to pay $1,200 to put in a bus seat outside so that people can use the bus stop coming to and from my work. I mean, people think about that stuff. Maybe not you if you drive, but people who use transit do think about that. So I would just say that's one example, but I really believe accessibility and making transit more like user friendly is going to be a key to getting more people to ride it.
Yeah, so we go from like bus stop corners, hyper local, to thinking about a real big regional priority, Valley Link.
Oh, okay.
Right. So Valley Link, right? If we were going to take a step that direction and like think about that priority for the East Bay, how do we help get that project completed? What do you have to share with us about Valley Link and its progress?
So I think Valley Link is doing a tremendous job. Kudos to Scott Haggerty and others for their work on that. I've gone and met with Eric Swalwell a couple times. I've met with DOT. One of the biggest opportunities right now is the hydrogen hub. So the federal government's funding for hydrogen hubs. Alameda County really needs to like secure the hydrogen hub, not just to produce green hydrogen here for the buses that AC Transit uses, the opportunity for that to move into the clean fuel market with the local consumer. But truthfully, that's how Valley Link could operate sustainably, I think. And it could create a revenue stream that could help also finance it because hydrogen can be sold. So I think the biggest thing that the East Bay Leadership Council could do is to become as supportive and engaged on how to bring the hydrogen hub to this region. So we already did some work to show that we want to do this, which was fortuitous. I, chairing both boards, the Transportation Commission and the Air District, was able to get matching funds from both of them to support the pilot project at the Port of Oakland, which is funding 40 drayage trucks. So we've got drayage trucks that are going to run on hydrogen. That should be all up and running in March or April of this year. And with that, the state and the CPUC gave funding as well. And we're basically looking to create an opportunity to continue goods movement at the pace that we're doing, but do it with clean fuel technology so that we're not continuing to emit pollutants inside the inner core of the Bay Area. And those hydrogen trucks can either transfer out to a facility in East County or the Central Valley, where they're going to switch over to other trucks that go cross country, or they can be connected to a larger network, hopefully, that gets built that provides for a clean transit solution for goods movement. So I would say that, where do we stand on it? We have a lot of good momentum. There's support at MTC for it. It has the region's support and it has congressional support. It's going to really come down to the choices that are made congressionally. So I think contacting the folks at Valley Link or the Transportation Commission to find out how you can best lean in or who you can call, I think would be the best way you could help. But we should be all working towards that.
Yeah. So, you go from being a council member in Emeryville, a small but thriving city, right?
Small and mighty,
to now
yeah.
serving small and mighty, but and now having this seat for ACTC where I just wanted to give you a sense of how does it feel to step outside of being maybe focused on hyper local issues to being more of a regionalist. Do you see yourself representing the whole county in this role as chair of ACTC? How does that change the way you approach certain issues than it does maybe if you were just focused on Emeryville?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I have always described myself as a regionalist. I think it's the most important level of government, hands down. Congress, we all watch them on TV. They're a bunch of buffoons and they get very little done. Okay, your state electeds do pass important laws and we spend a lot of time focused on it. Your city council is the front doorstep of government. They're there to help you fix the light pole, make sure the sewer is working, and keep the street paved. But truthfully, if you were looking for who is the economic generator and who is going to be the transformative government for the regional economy and the way we live our lives, it's regional government. So that's why I've spent so much time. I also chair the Alameda County Healthy Homes Board, which is a toxic remediation agency and health agency for the county's kids. Like, I spend a lot of time leaning into the regional seats of roles I have. I served on Ava Community Energy up until this last month. I really strongly believe that regional government is the most effective way for us to make change, and it's also the most impactful to local economy. So I do see that as important. And yes, I represent the second smallest by land size city in the entire Bay Area and the smallest in the East Bay. And it doesn't mean I love my city any less. I have lots to do in that little 1 square mile hamlet I have, but it really gets to, my role when I go to DC, like, I'm never talking about Emeryville unless I'm going on my own trip for my city. My job is to talk about, the 7th Street grade separation at the port. It's to talk about the rail improvement program. It's to talk about Valley Link. It's to bring money back for the region. And I'm effective as a messenger, and that's why I keep getting elected and sent to do that by my peers across the county, and why so many of them actually endorse me in my race for supervisor as well, as they know I'm effective at communicating a message about like why we're on the front line of this, why we're going to be the innovators, and why we're going to put the finished project online first. Like, we're going to be the first to complete that thing. And we take money when voters give it to us and we turn it into the product that people expected. And that trust is what we live off of. And we have to keep fulfilling that to keep getting the support of voters, but also to get the support at DOT. DOT will call me and say, what is the next thing you're doing? What are you working on next? And we got to take and look at the grant projects they have available and find out, okay, what's the best match in our portfolio of things we're working on? What's the best match for us? We have an unparalleled staff at ACTC. I would never be able to find a staff more competent to work on behalf of the county's transportation needs than I do there. But I definitely view regionalism as the most important form of government we have.
Well, I'm going to stay regional then, because we run a nonprofit that's focused on the region. So I'm going to take a step, and we're going to talk about the regional transportation measure being proposed, enabling legislation starting to work its way through the legislature. Any priorities for ATCC for a new regional transportation measure? And I think I am thinking a lot about how can we ensure that the East Bay gets our fair share to do the kind of transformational things that we need to do to sell this to our communities. I remind people often that the East Bay, Contra Costa and Alameda County, is nearly 40% of the Bay Area's population, right? But you wouldn't know it often with the way that this funding ends up following in these measures. So I've had my little soapbox moment related to that. There's a lot of questions, and we're staying engaged in all of those conversations as an organization. But regional transportation measure, priorities for you. How do we make sure that the East Bay isn't swept under the rug?
Yeah, well, so my priorities for the East Bay are 2 words: East Bay. That's literally my priorities. And I think you nailed it, Mark. You were gentle. I'm gonna take a glove off, and I'm gonna say there are some counties that have had people in state leadership, Santa Clara is maybe one of them, in the past, who have put their thumb on the scale in terms of where money has to go, despite, to your point, not housing the Bay Area's workforce, not being the economic generator for the goods movement industry in the Bay Area, like not being the locus for all of that. We're 40% of the population. We're the counties that are building housing out here in Contra Costa and Alameda. We're the ones providing the blue collar and working jobs. We're the ones, building what needs to be built to make this a sustainable region. But we keep getting elected officials at the state level in particular, who, when these ballot measures get put in, they're from San Francisco and San Mateo and Santa Clara. Nothing against any of my friends in those counties, but what the hell? I mean, like at the end of the day, like, what are we going to do about that? So one of the things in this regional measure that I'm really looking forward to is that there's at least an initial interest in having a discussion regionally with local electeds. And I have been asked if I would be interested in having some of that conversation by people within the county. And I'm hopeful that the leadership at MTC will really see the opportunity here to lean into the regional leadership at the county levels to ask us, what we need. And then also, I think, look at what we're doing. like look for the performance outcomes. I mean, that's something that we in the East Bay need to stand on, is like we are performers. And so it's not just that we have 40% of the population and so we need to get our fair share. It's also, what are you going to do with the taxpayer money? And I can't think of a better example. I don't have all the information on what Contra Costa does, but I'm sure you could help with that. But in Alameda County, that 1 cent sales tax leverage from Measure BB, the consolidation of B and BB a couple years ago, we put that to work effectively. We give people what they're promised. We're already, from that 2014 measure, we're already through most of the projects, and that measure goes till 2045. And we have a few, we're trying to fund those things as fast as we can, leverage as much state and federal money as we can, because not only is it engender the trust of the public, so if we go back and say, hey, we're good stewards of your money, we need you to support this, that's how the regional measure will get votes. That's the other thing. It's not just 40% of the people, it's the votes. So they need us to say, we want this, and we don't need to go and put our name behind something that isn't going to also reward us for our good work. And I think that's the message that we have to have.
I think we've got some high performers in Contra Costa County as well. I know that Contra Costa Transportation Authority is on the call. There's a lot to be proud of regionally. So I think that story holds, right? Speaking of those feelings and those facts. Yeah. So I think there's
I think we have to lean into our strength, which is that we are a minority majority in a sense, but like we're an effective group of people in the East Bay, and we have effective leaders running our agencies who do a great job, and the voters trust us and we perform. And I think those are all the reasons we can go to the table and say, okay, like you want this thing because systems that operate in San Francisco and San Mateo, Muni, Caltrain, these things, like we need to support those too. That's part of, it shouldn't be like us versus them. But like when it comes back to like, where does the money go? There needs to be a return to source that benefits us if we're going to lean into that. I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, I'm there with you there. So we're gonna stay on kind of transportation hot topics for a second. I've stayed for transportation on a long time. I want all the transportation folks on the call to recognize that. You know, there's a lot of different directions I could go here.
Give this man a raise.
Consolidation versus coordination. Senator Wahab made headlines with the proposal to consolidate all 27 Bay Area transit agencies. It didn't live long. That proposal, where do you stand? How much efficiency do you think can be gained with these efforts? And how do we, I think these conversations are coming from a real place. And so like, I want to be able to have this conversation. Where do you stand on kind of this ongoing debate around efficiency, coordination, and consolidation?
Yeah, I mean, so the end goal and the ideal is a consolidation, right? But like what needs to happen? People need to be pragmatic. These are public agencies with public employees that have publicly governed systems. They have boards, they have pensions, they're like, you can't, it's not like a business where we're just gonna merge. Like that just doesn't work. So it has to be like, how are we gonna coordinate? And then like, what things can we do that would align ourselves, right? So that there are fewer and fewer differences. And once you start looking the same, it becomes easier to then make an argument in the future for like why this makes sense. Because at some point, people in the future who aren't us today, most likely, are going to sit down and be like, we basically do the same thing. Do we need two boards? Do we need two mechanisms to do X and Y? But like right now, like we don't even have a single payment system, right? We don't even have a uniform payment system. We don't have an integrated schedule, right? There are things administratively that could be better coordinated, and this absolutely has to be a conversation that's part of any regional measure, right? Because at the end of the day, fewer people are taking transit since COVID because of work from home and other changes that people made in their life. And so there's going to be people who are like, well, why am I voting for this? And why do I need this thing? But we know that it's really critical to the economy and also to a lot of people who still come to work and work for us who rely on this. Like that's absolutely integral. And as soon as a major metropolitan region gets rid of its transit systems, like it rots very quickly. So it's a liability for us to not take care of it, but we have a message that we need to convey. So I really think that one of the things people need to do, it goes back to that accessible, reliable, safe, and clean, right? It's like, what can we do to bring improvements to the system? And then how can we ask them to better integrate what they do in a way that's responsible. So I personally think that there are administrative things that they could do that would be more responsible that affect those kind of 4 values that I mentioned. I think they could streamline and consolidate their schedule systems to find ways to make operations more seamless. It's called Seamless Bay Area for a reason, right? I think they need to integrate their fare systems. I think that there needs to be a uniform way in which we give people fares. So it's not just like, well, BART, you ride it by distance and you pay. AC Transit's a flat fare for no matter how far you go. Like, we need to actually do something, whether that's like London with zones or whatever. We need to do some things that just make transit more inviting, but we need to do it with an eye towards like, where's the long-term goal? And the long-term goal is that we have to manage fewer boards and agencies in a way that makes decision-making more integrated and easier in the future for us.
Thank you for diving into that topic. I did get one question from an audience member here related to congestion pricing.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe like the future of freeways, toll lanes, reactions to kind of some of those proposals.
Yeah, I think it's the devil's in the details on those things. So I know that the state is looking at VMT and like, could they tax VMT? The region is also, you know, like the state needs to give authority for the region to do that, similar to what New York City is looking at doing, or is doing. It depends on which day you talk to them, I suppose. But I do think that there's a need to look at that, and I do think that's something we need to take seriously. I do think congestion pricing is a reality, and if people are like, I don't like it, I don't want to pay it. Like, if you look at other major cities that have done it, it's actually really effective to reducing congestion, like reducing noise, investing in transit. I think a lot of times we don't want to get out of our own systems of habit, and we kind of shun something that will make us change. But communities that have changed it, it's not like this is a new concept. It's changed for the better. I think there's equity considerations to make, because in the Bay Area, we don't house our lowest income people close to transportation. So now are we going to have people who drive from Antioch who are already poorer because they can't afford housing paying more? I don't think so, right? Like, there's got to be some sort of equity consideration. Yeah. So for me, it won't just be as simple as there's a congestion tax on all people. There has to be some other variables that get integrated into that to ensure that we don't actually force our own workforce away from us, where they say, well, I'm not going to go to the Bay anymore, I'm going to work in Stockton. So like, you know, we have to think about how to do that competitively, but sustainably.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point about kind of the socioeconomic impacts of policies that aren't always immediately clear, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you really need to take a hard look at that. And I know that this has been something that's brought up with your role on the Air Board. Mm-hmm. So I know our friends at the building trades, you know, have talked about this related to kind of the socioeconomic policy at the Air Board. Is there movement happening at the Air Board related to kind of studying the socioeconomic impacts of policies that are implemented? I know CARB has made progress there. Anything you have to add on that happening at the Air Board?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, you know, I think there's a couple of things. One is we heard a lot about socioeconomic impacts during the development of Rule 6-5, you know, that it was going to result in the closure of refineries and the layoffs of many people. You know, I think the message I would have, because I know that you have trades and you have oil, you know, refinery folks, you know, here on this call probably. My message, diverse
membership. Yeah, we've got all kinds of folks.
Yeah, my message is the same as it was then. Is if you're gonna like hold on to the past and not work towards a future, then you're gonna be stuck in the past, and the future will leave you behind. The opposition we got to a lot of it was that this is not a good policy, this doesn't work. But there was nobody willing to, they just kept saying, we just want you to keep studying it, we want you to find something else. We spent a year doing that, and nobody would come to the meeting that I chaired and tell me what they wanted. They would just say, we want you to do something else. And that's just not, if you don't want to be part of, you know, the dinner party, you can be on the menu, I guess. Like, you have to be willing to say what you want, and you have to be willing to show progress. And I think that that's part of it. And so there is an interest in advancing socioeconomic analysis in a way that's more, I would say, you know, ubiquitously used, because right now I think it gets analyzed differently in different situations. There's not a lot of guidance around it. And so I appreciate and agree that there's a need for that. But right now, I just don't feel that those who are asking for it have demonstrated a desire to do it in good faith.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's also been spurred by some interesting conversations with Jennifer Hernandez at Holland and Knight, like talking about how, like, her concerns and her history. This would be a whole other, we could have a whole webinar
we could talk
kind of on
this
topic. And so we could talk more about this. I think that maybe there's work for the Legislative Analyst's Office to analyze impact related to some of these policies. So there's a number of different things that we can continue to talk about here. But I did want to We have a couple minutes left. I'm going to try to, in a minute, before I kind of do lightning round and give you a closing moment for closing thoughts. Your day job right now is working on behalf of victims of violent crime as an advocate for those community investments. Prop 1 is on the ballot in March. Any reactions or thoughts related to Proposition 1?
Yeah, everyone else is like super supportive of Prop 1. I have some concerns with Prop 1. I think Prop 1 is going to read really well to people. Like, oh yeah, why not produce housing for people who are, mentally ill and like take the MHSA money. It's important that we build housing that's supportive for people. It's something we're doing in my city. I value that, right? But I also think that I don't agree with putting budgetary formulas and ballot measures that apply universally across the entire state. I think that's a bad budget practice because we're essentially saying we're conscripting 30% of your funds go here, X% have to go here. And I think that you're going to see variation across counties as to how this works. Like, because I think that formula or that percentage may match up well with what a particular county's needs are. But in a county like Alameda, where there's a much higher need, one, you're only going to end homelessness for a certain number of people, but you're taking in something that's going to be a significant amount of the resources that need to go to the day-to-day service of those folks, and you're taking it away from that service system. Because the counties have been relied on MHSA and Prop 63 money for a long time, and now it's being budgetarily repurposed for them, which means they're going to have to find other ways to finance gaps that are created once it's conscripted away from them through the existing model. And there's already evidence in Alameda County, at least, that the service model isn't effective in delivering services. And so people are rightfully asking, like, I pay taxes, but what is it doing? It's because we don't have the most modern and up-to-date ways in delivering services. And now it's going to be conscripted to, albeit a good thing that's needed, but it's going to serve a smaller number of people because of the cost ratio of what housing costs per the number of people we'll house with it. That's not going to go the same way as it would have served many more people in the services center. So, I do think there are issues with it. I think what it's trying to do is noble and good, but I think that if it's passed, what people will see is that we'll have inequitable outcomes depending on the county.
Yeah, there's some interesting questions there. We're certainly staying in touch with leaders in the East Bay related to kind of this measure and considering our kind of own action as an organization related to that. So thank you for your feedback there. I'm going to go lightning round very quickly. This is just like one-word answers, and then you can close for me. So lightning round.
I can't commit to one-word answer for something.
Hey, no, I'm holding you to it. Bagels or donuts?
Oh, bagels.
Bagels. Okay, coffee or tea?
Neither.
No caffeine. Hot take.
I've never had a cup of coffee in my life. I don't drink caffeine. All right. I drink juice.
Podcast or music?
Music.
All right. Redwood Regional Park or Bay Trail? I know you're Mr. Go Outside.
Bay Trail.
Okay. And then window aisle or aisle on an AC transit ride through the East Bay?
Always the window seat.
All right, good to know. Okay, so I've heard some folks have called you the Energizer Bunny. I'm grateful for your energy today. So if you want a minute to close us out, happy to have that.
I appreciate that. So thanks, Mark, and thanks, EBLC, for inviting me here this morning. I'll just be really brief. Obviously, I appreciate you being up to speed and knowing what's going on in the region in the East Bay. I am running for county supervisor. If anybody is interested in that, I was endorsed by the East Bay Times this morning. It was a really lovely piece. So regional paper, take a look at it. I'd be happy to chat with anyone offline who's interested in supporting somebody who is pro-transportation infrastructure and development and jobs economy about my campaign. You can email me at jbauters, my first initial and last name, @gmail.com.
Thank you, John. Good luck. Let's stay in touch. There's lots of other things we could talk about, I am sure, but want to be mindful of everybody's time. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.